Okay, well, it is 10:05, so we are going to get started, guys. Everyone, my name is Tamika Seaton, and I'm the executive consultant of Grow Your Nonprofit. Welcome to another edition of Nonprofit Talk, a nonprofit series for learning. This month's webinar is 7 Ways Plan Giving Can Benefit Nonprofits. This helps nonprofits who are startup, small, and stagnant raise more money by providing them with strategies to run their nonprofit like a business. And I strongly believe that just because you're a nonprofit, you're still a business. I would like to thank our speaker today, Charles Kerwood. He's the partner at Waller Financial Planning Group. I'd like to thank him for taking his time out of his busy schedule to share his expert knowledge with us. I know that we're going to learn a lot today, and I hope that you have lots of takeaways that you could implement in your nonprofit right away. Before we get started, I'd like to lay out our program. We'll start with an icebreaker with Charlie, our guest speaker. We'll have a little discussion, and then Charlie will go right into his presentation. We will open the webinar for Q&A during the last 15 minutes of the program, which is about 10:45 a.m. In the chat box, please post your questions. I will read your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Look out for, after the program ends, look out for a survey about today's webinar because we'd like to hear your feedback about how we can do better and topics that you'd like to learn about in the future. So our next webinar will be held on November 16th, and we'll teach you how to turn event attendees into loyal donors. As you know, season is around the corner and a lot of nonprofits are planning events. Now let's have a little fun with our guest speaker, Charlie, with an icebreaker in lieu of me reading his bio. So let's jump right in, Charlie. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, Charlie. We see that you're a professional at the Waller Financial Group, and you have a lot of acronyms behind your name. We have CFP, CHFC, and AEP. What do those stand for?
Well, first of all, good morning to our audience. And Tamika, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. CFP stands for Certified Financial Planner. So in my line of work as a financial advisor and a planner, that's kind of the gold standard. So if you're looking for someone to help you with your overall holistic planning, that's someone to look for that has a CFP. CHFC is Charter Financial Consultant. Generally, folks that have that designation have wanted to learn a little bit more about estate planning and how it impacts their clients and their business. And then AEP is Accredited Estate Planner, which simply means that I'm a team player. I've committed to working with attorneys and CPAs as a team advisor so that we can find out, what the best strategy is for our clients in their best interest.
Oh, very good, very good. So I understand that you are a big movie buff. Tell me about your favorite movie and why.
Okay, so my favorite movie is Young Frankenstein. I love Mel Brooks movies. I just think he's hilarious. And, especially in today's world where we see so much negativity, it's really good to just laugh. And
Right.
so I loved Gene Wilder. I mean, I miss him. I think he was a great actor. Peter Boyle, Madeline Kahn, all those folks are just, when you put them together, they're just hilarious. So even when I watch it by myself, I'm laughing out loud.
Very cool, very cool. And I like to give a little history about Charlie and I. Charlie and I go back about 10 years. I've been in the area for 15 years, and I was part of our Plan Giving Council, right? And we connected and just been friends ever since. And whenever I have some financial advice or I reach out to Charlie, and he always breaks it down to me in very simple terms. So thanks, Charlie.
You're very welcome. Good.
Okay, well, let's get this road on the show. Does that make sense, Charlie?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure, okay. All righty. So today our topic is 7 ways plan giving can benefit nonprofits. So can you please break down what exactly is the definition of plan giving and how it could benefit nonprofits?
Well, plan giving really applies to major gifts that donors leave upon death, generally speaking. And it's also known as legacy giving or gift planning. So those terms are interchangeable, but generally speaking, major gifts at death.
Okay, okay, very good, very good. And you know, we when we see it celebrities on TV, we always think, oh, celebrities have it all together. They have a team of lawyers, and but we can't always assume that celebrities or donors have it all figured out in their estate plan. In fact, there are some notable famous people who didn't have an estate plan and they died intestate. Charlie, can you elaborate on some of those celebrities and what you think might happen?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I have a lot of clients that come in that don't have estate planning done. So those would be your donors. I call
Mhm.
them clients, you call them donors. But some of the famous people that you would assume had something together, I was surprised at some of the names: William Seymour Hoffman, Jimi Hendrix, Michael Jackson, which we've heard some about, Sonny
Right,
Bono, Howard Hughes, which is really surprising, Aretha Franklin, a recent celebrity, and then Prince. And,
right,
you know, honestly, I don't know what it is that causes people to do that, except that they don't want to talk about death.
right,
And the sad thing is that, it can be very expensive if you don't have your estate planning organized. You spend a lifetime of accumulating wealth. If you die without estate planning, then the state where you're a resident dictates how things are divided. And when you're dealing with estates of this size, you're bound to have lawsuits. So it can
right.
be many, many years before a lot of these estates are settled, which is really a shame.
And it can be quite pricey. And who ends up winning
I,
most of the time with these when this estate is settled and tied up in court?
well, unfortunately, the attorneys. They're
Right, right. They end up. Even if an individual doesn't think they're wealthy, in this case, you describe celebrities who, have millions of dollars in the states, and some people say, "Well, I don't have much, and I might have a 401k or individual retirement account. I don't really need an estate plan." But is that true?
No, it's not. I think everybody needs estate planning at one level or another. Think about healthcare directives, people making decisions for your health. Beneficiary designations. I don't know how many times I've seen ex-spouses listed or none at all, which again makes it very, very messy. So it's important to have those well organized, work with a good estate attorney, and make sure your beneficiaries are current.
Right, right. So when we think about, our whole focus is on nonprofits, right? So when we think about nonprofits who are startup, small, and stagnant, they don't necessarily have the resources nor the knowledge to really comfortably talk to donors about planned giving. What are some of the strategies they could use in order to prepare themselves for a discussion of such with a donor?
Well, first of all, relationships, as we know, are key, right? We don't want to talk to people about money unless we have a good relationship with them. It can be uncomfortable. Um, and the one thing that I would remind nonprofits about when you're developing those relationships, whether it's with their donors or with other professionals, it's a marathon, not a
Right,
sprint. The things don't happen automatically and immediately. In fact, when I work with clients in planning, the first question I ask is not going to be, okay, where do you want to leave your money to charity?
mhm,
It's going to be find out what their um, main thoughts are. Many times it's grandkids and children. And then beyond that, they haven't really thought about it. So that brings up the opportunity to discuss charities. Okay.
right,
I would suggest, like I do in my business, listen for keywords that might create the opening to have a conversation. Okay, so some keywords to maybe listen for are, you know, I really can't give. I've got a large IRA and that's going to create tax issues for me. Okay.
okay,
I've done really well in the market in the last 10 years. Okay. So maybe you've accumulated more than you ever thought you would be able to do. An easy one is I wish I could give more. Well, guess what? I can show you how to do that. Right.
right,
And then if they're getting ready to sell a business or sell any type of real estate, or if they have even concerns about how their children spend money, these are
mhm,
key words or key phrases that create an opening for you to have a more in-depth discussion.
right, right. So we talk about that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And oftentimes when I talk to my clients, they need to raise money now to keep the doors open. They want everything now. But as you know, relationships is key. Now, when we're thinking about the types of donors that we have these relationships with, um, let's not forget our volunteers who have volunteered with our organization for 5, 10, 20 years. I think they would be a great candidate for plan giving, as well as that donor who might just give $5 a year as a tester and might have you in their estate plans. So don't judge a book by its cover, right?
I would agree. How many times have we read in the newspaper about the librarian that you thought didn't have anything but gave a large sum at her death or his death to their favorite charity?
Right.
So, and the other thing I would say is not only creating relationships with your donors, but create relationships with other professionals such as financial advisors or estate planning attorneys, CPAs. They're also talking to donors about their charitable intent. Although most people would be surprised to know that about 75% of professional advisors do not feel comfortable themselves talking to
Mm.
clients about philanthropy or charitable giving. We did a study a few years ago with the Community Foundation, and it had some different target groups that they talked with, and a lot of them did not raise their hand when they were asked about how many talked to their clients about charitable giving. Um, I think it's important to do that because many clients and donors don't realize the different ways that they can give, whether during their lifetime or at death. And remember that plan giving isn't an immediate thing. Plan
Right.
giving generally is going to be something at death, as we talked about before. And so there are different types of strategies that you can look at in terms of plan giving.
Mhm.
I would encourage, the nonprofits to look at their list of donors. I'm sure they have estate planners on their donor list. I'm sure they have CPAs. I'm sure they have financial advisors. And I would try to develop a deeper relationship with them, both on the donor side, but also as an advisor that
Right.
might be able to help them if they're having a conversation with a donor who's not necessarily in that world, right? And so, those are some different thoughts I would say from a relationship standpoint to
Mhm.
pay attention to. If you want, I can go ahead and jump into some of the giving techniques.
Right, right. Well, before we jump right in, if a nonprofit does not have a relationship with a financial planner, say on their board or is a donor, what is another way that they could get to know financial advisor or planner and develop a relationship? I know we had a discussion yesterday about the Estate Planning Council opening up membership to nonprofits to join to get to know them a little bit better in order to build relationship.
And that's right. I would say that that's another way, but I would be really surprised if they go through their list, they don't have a
Okay.
financial advisor, an attorney, or a CPA. And that's really where I would start first because
Okay.
you know that they have a passion for your organization. So that's a very easy conversation to have.
Right. Right. Okay. So with that said, let's get into the 7 different plan giving strategies that can benefit your nonprofit.
Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit because I do have some things that can be used both for current giving and also as plan giving. So, first of all, I'm going to go from least complicated to most complicated.
Okay. Now, when you talk about least complicated, I know we talked about breaking it down for small nonprofits, for medium-sized nonprofits, and large. So when you say the low-hanging fruit, are we talking about the easy ones for small nonprofits to handle?
That's right.
Okay, great.
A lot of the later options are generally used by larger organizations, but we can talk a little bit more.
Okay.
So, first of all, the first is testamentary gifts, which we touched on. Okay, so those are bequests that are usually made by a donor's will or their trust, may also be beneficiaries on life insurance or retirement plans. And they also may, at the donor's death, have distributions from donor advised funds or even private family foundations.
Mhm.
One of the things that I do is personally in my planning, just to give you an example, is I have a donor advised fund. I fund that partially right now during my working years so that later on, when maybe I don't have the cash flow and I'm on the proverbial fixed income, I can make gifts later at that time. But also, my current gifts I give directly. Okay, so I'm doing both plan giving because the donor advised fund, quite frankly, probably won't be paid out until my death. So
Okay.
that's an example of how that could be a testamentary type gift, is at death that the donor advised fund would pay out to the various charities. Next is really a current gift strategy, but I think it's very important to touch on highly appreciated stock. So let's say I bought Apple at $100 a share,
Right.
and today it's worth 500. Okay. If I want to give to charity, I could either sell the stock, pay capital gains on $400 of appreciation, or
Right.
yet not pay any tax at all. Donate that stock to the charity. The charity turns around and sells it, use it either for current needs or future needs, but they don't pay tax. So essentially, in that example, nobody ever pays tax on the growth of the stock.
Mhm.
Now, the deduction is 30% of AGI, adjusted gross income,
Right.
versus one of the higher amounts for cash. But it's a great way for someone who is under 70 and a half, has highly appreciated stock, to make gifts. Uh,
Right.
the only thing I would say there are a couple notes to highlight. One, if the stock is in a loss position, there's no benefit to the donor to donate the stock as is. I would sell it, take the loss, and donate cash to the charity.
Okay.
The thing I would say is, if a client says, well, I really like that stock, I don't want to get rid of it. Well, give away the appreciated stock and then take cash out of your bank account and buy more, because then you've essentially reset what I call the tax basis.
Okay.
And the last item there is, it is important for the nonprofit to have some kind of a brokerage account in order to do the donation of stock, because in today's world, it's mostly done electronically.
Okay. Can I ask you a question? How does a nonprofit open a brokerage account, and is there a minimum to open it?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that, again, look at your list of people in your group. You may have a financial advisor in there. I'm sure that if they're passionate about the charity, which they are, if they're giving to them,
Mhm.
have them just open up a brokerage account. It's very inexpensive. Um, I would do it for charities with whom I work, but I wouldn't necessarily do it for a charity that I don't have a relationship with.
Right.
Okay. But that's the way I would start. And then if worse comes to worse, they could look at maybe like Schwab, do a search for Schwab or TD Ameritrade or Fidelity.
Okay. And it also say they're still intimidated about opening the brokerage account. Could a community foundation be helpful in guiding them in hosting their endowment?
That's a great thought. Yeah. So if you had an agency fund at the foundation,
Mhm.
the owner could then transfer the stock to the agency fund, because the community foundation does have a relationship with brokerage firms.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Very good.
Good question. Okay, the next easy one that I look at, and I call it easy because, again, it's fully taxable to the donor, but to the charity would be tax free. So IRAs and Roth IRAs, there are
Okay.
provisions under current tax law that allow donors to directly make a gift to charity from their IRA. Now, Roth IRAs, I probably would not ever recommend a client do a distribution from a Roth IRA. And the reason why is because that grows forever tax free. I would look at other assets in my portfolio to make the gifts. IRAs are great because their tax is ordinary income, which is at the highest prevailing tax rate. A donor that can make those gifts has to be at least age 70 and a half.
Mhm.
Even though under current law, with changes that happened recently with the CARES Act and Secure Acts, um, the required minimum distribution age is now 72. You can
Wow.
still make the gift at 70 and a half. And each participant can donate up to $100,000 per year from their IRA. Caveat needs to be that it has to be paid directly to the charity. So the donor can't take possession of the cash, in other words, have the check made payable to their name and then turn around and give it to the charity, it needs to be payable directly to the charity in order for it not to show up in the taxpayer's income.
Okay.
This is very beneficial for taxpayers who are concerned about their Social Security being taxed, pushing them into a higher tax bracket for Medicare premiums, which if your income is over a certain level, your Medicare premiums go up. So they could be now 150, they might go up to over 400. So those are some good reasons to do the direct transfer from an IRA. In formal terms, they're called qualified charitable distributions.
Okay.
Okay. Now, on both the stock and the IRA gifts, I would encourage nonprofits to start getting out emails to their donors, reminding them of these types of giving opportunities, because TD Ameritrade, with whom we work, has specific deadlines on how long you can go before they can guarantee a gift will be made. So for example, they've told us that about the second week of December, if any requests are made after that for transfer of stock or transfer of IRA money, that they can't guarantee it'll be done before December 31st.
Right. Right.
So it's
So
good.
yeah, Mhm. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so it's good to remind people now. Don't wait too much longer, because if people are thinking about it, they need to be aware of those deadlines.
Right, right. So we were talking about this yesterday, that year-end giving is around the corner, as you just discussed, and nonprofits really need to be talking to their donors now. They need to have their campaigns going on in their e-newsletter or whatever method they use, because at the last minute, you mentioned donors are trying to get that tax deduction before December 31st. I remember last year, Eileen Conley with the Community Foundation of Collier County, she mentioned them staying at their office late to take in requests, because people at the last minute want to make contributions to avoid paying taxes on that money and giving it to nonprofits. So I would encourage you to start, doing your marketing right now and reaching out to your donors about your year-end giving.
And one other thought too. So people that are over the 70 and a half, for certain, if they were taking minimum distributions prior to the change in the tax law, or even people that are taking it at 72, they have required minimum distributions they have to take out every year, whether they want to spend the money or not, or need to spend the money or not. They have to take a distribution.
Mhm.
If they give some of that money to charity, that applies towards their required minimum distribution. So for example, if the required minimum distribution is 25,000 and they want to give $10,000 from their IRA to their favorite charity, they have to, the only other part they have to take out is 15,000, and that's the part that would show up on their income tax return. Okay, so
Mhm.
it does help offset that.
Okay. Okay.
The other thing it does is it reduces future required minimum distributions. If you don't need money and you're only taking it because the government says you have to, by giving those gifts early and often, they can reduce future year distributions.
Very good. Very good. Okay. All right. Number 4.
Okay, so moving into some maybe less common or less seen type gifts, life insurance. So you might have a donor who has a life insurance policy that they really don't need anymore for survivor income or to pay kids or grandkids college or whatever. The donor can transfer that life insurance policy to the charity. Now, it works best with a permanent life insurance. In other words, term life insurance is only good for so many years.
Right.
Okay, and that's beneficial when your need is temporary. For permanent life insurance that has cash value, generally that premium will be an ongoing premium.
Mhm.
Different types of life insurance, and I won't dig into the weeds on that, but let's just say permanent life insurance is the best option. If you assign that policy, in other words, transfer it to the nonprofit and they're now the owner, they will make themselves beneficiary on that, and the donor gets a deduction immediately for the transfer of that permanent life insurance. Future premiums that are paid by the donor in order to keep the policy in force, okay, are also considered to be donations to the charity. So they get an income tax deduction every year when they do those future premiums. And so upon death of the donor of the life insurance policy or the insured, the nonprofit would receive the death benefit proceeds.
Okay.
Less common, but it is a gifting technique that people have. So, if someone knows they have a policy that they don't need anymore, they have a passion for their charity, that might be a way to go.
Okay. All
Okay.
righty. Tell us about charitable remainder trust.
Okay, so charitable remainder trusts, the way that works, I guess, again, this is going to be a planned gift because the payout to the charity does not happen until the income beneficiary passes away. So charitable remainder trust would be the donor makes gifts of cash or highly appreciated assets. Those are very beneficial, like real estate or stock, those kinds of assets. They do that into a pot, and then the charity or a third party would invest those funds and pay out a certain income stream to the donor for their lifetime or whoever they have as an income beneficiary. So generally what happens, and those can be variable or fixed payments, the donor gets a partial upfront deduction because essentially they're giving the end result to the charity upon their death, but during their lifetime, they're going to receive income from that. So it's not a full 100% deduction. Charitable remainder trusts were very prevalent back in probably the 80s and early 90s. We did a few of those ourselves with donors, usually highly appreciated stock or even real estate. And so what happens is they're based on life expectancy. They're based on current interest rates, based on the value of the assets. And there's a very complicated calculation that's done to determine what the upfront deduction is for the donor. Because from a numbers standpoint, in order to have a charitable remainder trust that is considered to be a qualified charitable remainder trust, there has to be at least 5% of the value of that trust available at their death. What I have seen more of are charitable remainder trusts that are created upon the donor's death that pays an income stream to another beneficiary. Let me give you an example. So prior to tax law changes that occurred in 2019 and 2020, if you had a beneficiary on your IRA who was not your spouse, say it was a child or a grandchild, they could take that IRA and distribute it over their remaining lifetime. So all of a sudden, you have someone who's 70 years old, who's 72, let's call it, taking required minimum distributions. They pass away. The child or grandchild could stretch that out over their remaining life expectancy, which are based on IRS tables that are published. Okay. Now, a non-spouse beneficiary has to take it out within a 10-year window. It doesn't have to be evenly spaced, as long as by the 10th year following the participant's death, the donor's death, the money is all used up. So some people don't like that. They don't like the fact that all of a sudden their child is going to have to take a slug of money and pay a big amount of income tax on it. So what they've done is they've created their own stretch out by having the assets left to a charitable remainder trust. And then that charitable remainder trust pays to their beneficiary, their son or child or whoever. And then upon their death, the remaining assets would go to charity.
Okay.
So it creates essentially your own stretch out, replacing what used to be under the law. So we're going to see more of that, I think, especially with tax rates potentially going up next year. You may see more charitable remainder trusts come into play. They have to be drafted by an attorney or drafted by some of the third parties that are out there. For example, there's an organization called Renaissance in Indiana who does administration for charitable remainder trusts.
Okay. So nonprofits, I hope we're not getting intimidated by all these different terms. Just knowing the basics is very important. And like Charlie emphasizes, the importance of having a financial planner on your team to kind of help guide the donor and get these systems in place. Now tell us more about charitable lead trust.
Okay, so a charitable lead trust is kind of the reverse. Okay, under charitable remainder trust, the donor receives a stream of income, and at their death, the resulting principal goes to charity.
Right.
Charitable lead trust, it's the reverse. So the charity receives income from the assets for a number of years, a term, and then after that term, the remaining assets go back to the donor or to the donor's beneficiaries. So let me give you an example.
Yes.
So say there's a donor who's very successful in real estate. They have lots of apartments or receiving income from.
Okay.
Let's just use numbers, $2 million. So what they would do is maybe do a 5% payout to the charity for say 20 years. So the charity receives on $2 million, $100,000 a year for a 20-year term. Well, for that, the donor receives an upfront tax deduction, okay, for, not to complicate things, but the present value of that 20-year income stream. Okay, that's the immediate income tax deduction that they would get. And then at the end of that term, the donor or the beneficiaries would receive whatever's left over. That's a great estate planning and donor technique that is very good in a very low interest rate environment.
Right.
They use a discount rate that are published by the IRS tables. It's called a 75/20 rate. And today it's about 1%. So that makes the deduction larger. And as long as that asset grows by more than 1% per year, it's a real benefit to the donor and the beneficiaries because it's a discounted value for estate tax purposes.
Right.
Again, you may see more of that at some point with changes in the tax law that are coming up, combined with the low interest rate environment that we're in.
Mm-hmm. So all these different strategies, we're at number 6. It sounds like all these strategies are win-win for both the nonprofit as well as the donor. So when just a basic person may say, well, why would I want to do this? Well, guess what? If you don't utilize some of these strategies, you'll end up paying Uncle Sam. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I'll give you, again, a personal story about myself, okay? Because I do the things that I tell my clients to do, obviously, okay? So I'm single with a cat, okay? And
Shout out to Cleo.
Cleopatra, yes. And, my parents are still living and I have one brother and one sister. So one of the things I have a very strong affinity for charities, but I also care very much about my family.
Uh-huh.
So upon my death, I had originally anticipated that, my retirement plan assets would stretch out over lifetimes. Okay. And all of a sudden the government says, nope, it has to be paid out over a 10-year window. Well, I didn't like that because there's a lot of tax that would be paid and less for my family. So I said, you know what? Instead of doing that, I'm going to leave charity as the primary beneficiary of my retirement assets. And I'll turn around and just get a life insurance policy on my life to replace those assets.
And why?
And that's what I did. So now the government won't get any money.
Right.
Retirement assets.
And your family doesn't have to pay taxes on the life insurance.
Exactly. And the charity gets to use 100% of the money.
Right.
For me, that was a win-win because I was able to do a workaround. But there are clients and donors that are out there that are looking for ways to make sure that charities benefit. They just don't know necessarily how to do it.
Wow.
And I don't expect the nonprofits to really dig into the weeds and talk about this. I would say we're just trying to create awareness so they know that there are various tools out there to use for the donor's best interest and their best interest. We're not, the clients with whom I work, generally, we're doing the QCDs, the qualified charitable distributions from IRAs. We're doing the highly appreciated stock. We don't run as much into the CRTs, charitable remainder trust, and the charitable lead trust, because those are really for larger estates, clients that have larger, more complicated cases, and those are not people with whom I work. So, I try to keep it as simple as possible for clients, find the easiest way. I call it planning tolerance, right?
Okay.
You start to see your donor's eyes glaze over or your client's eyes glaze over, it's time to back off and maybe look at, maybe some simpler solutions, if you will.
Right, right. And that leads us into number 7, charitable gift annuity.
So charitable gift annuities, I don't very often see. Okay. They're really a contract between a donor and a charity. Donor makes an upfront contribution to the charity, but the charity in turn promises a stream of income to the donor until they pass away. Now, these are usually done by much larger charities. I've seen them at universities. I've seen them at some hospitals, because the risk to the charity is that the donor may live a really long time, and so the charity may end up with nothing. Okay. And so the risk is for the charity to run out of money to pay the income stream if they live beyond the life expectancy tables, because again, these are going to be based on the donor's age, life expectancy, current interest rates. I've seen them, the minimum gift is usually 5,000. I've seen some as low as 10. I haven't seen a 5,000 charitable gift annuity. It doesn't mean they're not out there. I just don't run into it very often. But for smaller charities that run into a donor that insists on doing a charitable gift annuity, I talked to Eileen over to Community Foundation. They're currently doing them, but I don't know how much longer they're going to do that. And so maybe a better option that she gave to me is a gentleman over at Charitable Gift America. And what they do is they determine what the amount should be that's left over for the charity's benefit, and then they immediately give that money to the charity, and they carry the risk of doing the payout for the charitable gift annuity. Right. And while we're having this conversation here, I do want to tell the people in our audience that I am going to put together an easy summary of all the things that we've talked about today with this additional information. I apologize, I didn't have slides ready to do this, but I will get the summary outline.
Yeah, well, I think a summary is even better, because this is a takeaway that I'll email to you in probably a few days or sometime next week, with this, along with Charlie's contact information, should you have any follow-up questions. So in wrapping up this segment, Charlie, it sounds like if a nonprofit, say they have their fundraising plan in place, they have their development staff, that it'd be very beneficial to have a staff member specifically knowledgeable about plan giving and very intentional about raising awareness and educating donors, because it could be very beneficial to the nonprofit. Because I know here in Southwest Florida, we're event heavy. We spend tens of thousands of hours planning these events, and it's the most expensive way to raise money. We're buying dinners, and then there's the alcohol that comes along with it, and there's the dress up and staff time. Then guess what? The event ends. We have all of these transactional donors who probably came just because a sponsor bought a table or sponsored a ticket, and they never really understand the nonprofit's mission, and they never see the donor, the transactional donor again until next year. So I always emphasize when I work with my clients the importance of having a strategic plan and the fundraising within them. And one of, as part of that, having a gift acceptance policy. Can you get into a little bit? We have 1 minute left before we open it up to Q&A. Gift acceptance policy. How can a nonprofit put something together? Is there a template out there, or to speak to their advisor?
I'm sure that there are a lot of templates out there. Really, the purpose of a gift acceptance policy is to be able to know the ones that you don't want to receive. You don't want
Right.
to take a gift. Okay. Some of them might be real estate. The nonprofit's not able to handle something like that. So I would say that's really going to be up to your board. It's going to be up to your investment or finance committee to come up with something like that. And I would also say that they probably should look at what's called a windfall policy, because as we talked about, some of these planned gifts, we don't know when they're going to crop up, or as we call it in my business, mature. Okay.
Mhm.
So when that happens, all of a sudden the charity is going to receive a large sum of money in some cases, and they need to know what to be able to do with that.
Right.
So some of it might be to put away in an endowment for a rainy day fund
Mhm.
to help fund current operations. But I think it's important that something be in place for when that time does happen, because they're out there.
Right.
Have them in their wills and have them in their trusts. And if you develop those deep relationships with your donors, you can ask them. They're not going to be offended if you
Mhm.
about that, because they know you care about the organization. And in order for you to be able to do your work, you need to know what may be out there for you to receive in the future.
Right, right. So it's 10:46. We're going to open it up to questions. So if any of our participants have questions, please type them in the chat box and we will do our best to answer them. Do not be shy. I know this is a tough conversation, but I think it's great information. I think we don't have enough of these conversations, and it can really be beneficial to the nonprofit as far as raising money to fund its mission, increasing the capacity of people served, and so much more. So far, I don't see any questions, guys. Let's see here. Um, Martha, Marcy, Lewis, Kelly, Daryl, do we have any questions, guys? Don't be shy.
Are they telling me I did such a great job that they have no questions?
I think that's what it is. They did you did such a great job. Okay, here we go, Martha. In our area, approximately how many donors are aware of the benefit of giving from their individual retirement account and consequences of not giving from the IRA?
That's a good question. I don't have the fun fact for our area, but I would say that just from my demographic of the clients with whom I work, um, I would say probably 75% of them don't understand, uh, what would happen upon their death if they leave it to their family. Obviously, surviving spouse, they can continue to tax defer it. But if you're a widow or widower or single, I'm sure that they're not aware that there's a 10-year window during which the uh, beneficiary has to take out the money and pay the taxes.
Okay. Okay, we have a question from Marcy. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in AGI this year, 60 versus 100? Can you tell us again what is AGI first?
Okay, AGI is adjusted gross income.
Okay.
It's the bottom line on your tax return, on the front of your tax return generally, but it'll say adjusted gross income. And so there's a percentage that's applied to that. 100% that the government's talking about this year is really for cash gifts. Okay. So for highly appreciated stock, it's still only going to be 30% of adjusted gross income that you can contribute. They still have all these other little caveats out there. So it's going to really depend on the gift.
Okay. Okay, we have a question from Daryl. Would you recommend that a small business match employee donations to the nonprofit? If so,
Absolutely.
is that tax deductible?
Tax deductible, the matches would be tax deductible by the business.
Okay.
It wouldn't count to the donor gets their share, but the business gets their share of a deduction.
Okay.
And the thing about a business is they can deduct 100% of that, okay, versus the donor for their share, depending on the amount, that if they're using the standard deduction, they might not even deduct that charitable gift.
Hmm. Can you elaborate on standard deduction versus itemized deduction?
Sure. Standard deduction is just a flat number that the government allows for you to take on your tax return. Probably with the changes in the tax law, occurred back in December of 2017, most people are now using the standard deduction. I had a number in. So for a married couple over 65, their standard deduction is 27,800 this year.
Mm.
So in order for them to benefit from itemizing, their property taxes, medical expenses, and charitable gifts need to exceed 27,800 that to benefit them.
I see. Okay, okay, very good. Lewis, I see that you're quiet. I understand that you have a nonprofit as well. Do you have any questions with the United Haitian American Chamber of Commerce of Southwest Florida? Okay, let's see here. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'll give everyone one more minute. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Charlie, before we close out the program?
Well, even though I like to hear myself talk, I think I probably hit on most of the salient points here. But I would say for nonprofits, don't be shy about talking to your donors, especially your donors who you know are very passionate about the organization. One of the things I do tell clients, because many of us have heard about bunching charitable deductions because of that itemized deduction versus standard deduction thing. Okay, so they might front end load gifts in 1 year to be able to deduct. So what I counsel clients to do in those cases, and you may want to have more of a conversation with your donors, is make them realize that is front end loaded. That's for the next 5 years. So please don't count on that cash flow in the next 5 years because I gave it to you right up front.
Right.
I tell clients to make sure that they let their charities know that, because I know charities count on some of that for their cash flow. The other thing, if you really want to look good to your donors who give from their IRA, when the gift letter is sent to the donor, make sure you put on there or highlight that it was a qualified charitable deduction. Because what happens at tax time is the client, and I run into this all the time, even when I send the information to the accountant, they will invariably include that in either itemized deductions or include the whole IRA distribution as part of their income. Because when the 1099-Rs are issued by the IRA custodian, they don't put on there that it was a qualified charitable gift. They're just going to show the whole amount of the distribution from the IRA. So it's incumbent upon the donor to let their accountant know that that was indeed a gift, or at least partial gift.
Very important. Well, guys, that is our program. I want to thank you so much for your support, and I hope that you learned a lot. I know every time I talk to Charlie, I learned so much about planned giving. Again, we will email you Charlie's outline and summary of today's program, and it would include the 7 different planned giving techniques that we talked about. I would like to put a plug out there. Please Grow Your Nonprofit on Facebook at Grow Your Non-Profit, and visit our website, growyournonprofit-.com, for a list of our services. If there's any way that we can help you, please reach out to us. You have our contact information. I am blessed to bring more informational programs to you to help you grow your nonprofit, raise more money, become a sustainable nonprofit, work hard, work smarter, not harder, and grow your nonprofit like a business. The only difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is its tax exemption status. So we always need to think about sustainability and long-term growth. So that is our story, and we're sticking to it. Again, Charlie, thank you for joining us, and thank you, our participants, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tamika.
Thank you. Bye-bye.